Are your models looking a little more basic than you want them to? Well, don't worry, your pal Garrett's here to show you how to make the base drop. On today's episode of The Miniature Men. In today's video, I'm mostly working on some banners for the Raise the Banner High objective in Warhammer 40k. This gives me a lot of real estate to add personality on the base to contribute to the model. Let's take a look at some of the elements that I had to custom make for this build. We've got some sandbags here made out of green stuff. I use about 5mm of Knead-A-Tight tape that I roll up to a ball and then work into a tablet, place onto the base, and then I use a dental tool to make the stitching on the sides of the bags. Stack on a couple of these and fold them up a little bit to make it look more rugged. I installed some barbed wire that I custom made. You can see how I make it on another video here. I also needed to use some wire pickets on this model, so I drilled some holes so that they could stay in place better. After rotating the barbed wire into place, I lock it in with some glue. Using some super glue, I glued down some plaster rocks that Daniel made. I also used some skulls from Games Workshop, this half a demon head, and some Space Marine helmets. I used some wooden duct boards from Secret Weapon Miniatures, and I measured these out by crimping the edges with a set of hobby clippers and then cutting them down with a piercing saw. Using a piercing saw is important because anything too large might leave big splinters that ruin the wooden boards. Here's what everything looks like once it's modeled and on the base. It's going to be hard to reach some parts later on, so before we start anything here, make sure you've primed and airbrushed everything you're gonna need. Once you finish that, I'll meet you over at the hobby desk to see what tools we're gonna use today. Our first tool is AK Interactive Muddy Ground from the Diorama series. This stuff is thick, chunky, and it makes the perfect base to get this project started. You're gonna want a palette to work with. Anything that's hard or plastic, but just not paper. Paper will dry things out faster. You don't want to work directly from the container because you might spill it and cause a real big problem in your room. You also want to have a nice assortment of shapers, plastic, metal, brushes, silicone. These will help you meet different needs as you work through different projects. For the most part, you only need one big shaper to really spread out over large areas and one small shaper to get into small parts. You could also use a toothpick when it needs to get really fine and precise. Get a cotton swab and some water nearby so you can bail yourself out when you make some mistakes. The general technique here is to take as much of the mud as you can fit onto an area and to tamp it down and squeeze it out towards all the models that are on top of the base. This way you don't get any mud on the sides of anything. As long as you're using the right tool and you're pushing the material sideways instead of trying to drop it down where you want it, you should be fine. Now that we've got the basics covered, let's try a more advanced technique. Take an oval-shaped tool, put some water on it so the mud doesn't stick to it, and tap it up and down on the mud to make individual footprints. This makes it look like one person walked through the mud. If you want to make it look like a column of soldiers marched through the mud, drag it as you tap it up and down to make the ruts that the feet would make as that single file column walks through the mud. You can do something similar with tank tracks if you take a spare piece of tank tread, put some water on it, lay it down on the mud, and take it off, leaving an imprint of a tank tread that passed over this mud. If you're not planning on dull coating or matte coating your miniatures, or maybe you already did, then you can take this opportunity with the wet mud and put in a grass tuft directly on it. No glue needed. Once you've finished sculpting, it's time to let the mud dry. This product takes a lot longer than any other paint product you're used to, so go ahead and give it overnight and come back to it the next day. Once it's dry, get your Agrax Earthshade or any dark brown wash and start coating the mud. Make sure you hit the lower parts harder, like the footprints, the trenches, or the tank treads that you shaped earlier. There's no real need to be delicate here. You can use your shade at full strength or water it down. It's up to you. If you were lucky and you left some painted model elements in the mud and you need to shade those, you can do that at the same time. Once your wash dries out, you can come back with a dry brush and highlight all the raised areas. I like to use flat earth to highlight my mud, but you can use any lighter browns as well. You can mix and match the paint, or you can use different colors at different points in the mud to give it some variety. If you really want to go the extra mile with your bases, go ahead and try out some Vallejo water texture. You lay this inside the footprints or tank treads of the base, and it makes it look like water is collected there. You can combine it with any pigment you want. Right here, I'm using Army Painter's Military Shader Wash. This material is only good for 3 millimeters of depth. After that, it ruins itself, so make sure you're using it in limited quantities. Just so you know, most bases are 5 millimeters tall in total, so as long as you're less than half of that, you should be fine. If you need to do more than that, use it, wait for it to dry, and then add more. Make sure you do this after everything else with the model is finished, including the matte coat. Otherwise, you could ruin your water texture. Now that we're finished, hopefully your bases won't look basic anymore. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and make sure you guys subscribe to this channel to see other content like how we make the barbed wire, and follow us on Instagram to see how we made our sandbags today. That's it for now, guys. We'll see you next Friday.